If you're a senior leader and something feels fundamentally off, you're exhausted in a way that sleep doesn't fix, you're performing but not thriving, successful on paper but hollow underneath, I want to offer you something that might be just the most important reframe of your career. You're not broken, it just feels that way. We're in the middle of what I would describe as a human sustainability crisis at the senior level, and it's accelerating. Human sustainability has become the corporate buzzword, and it's a buzzword for a reason. Because the people who are supposed to hold organisations together are themselves beginning to fracture under pressure they can't quite name. I've spent years working with senior executives and entrepreneurs through the Leadership Inside Out framework, and what I consistently find is this. The leaders who are struggling most are not the ones who lack talent. They're not the ones who lack drive. They're not even the ones with the hardest jobs. They're the ones who have unknowingly built their entire professional identity on something that was never designed to hold their weight. This is what I call the outside-in trap. And until you can see it clearly, until you can actually name it, it's almost impossible to get out of it. Let me explain exactly what I mean. Throughout our careers, and particularly in those formative early years that shape our professional identity, we learn to measure ourselves against the external world. We learn to read our value from the signals that come back to us from the outside. When the board is happy, we feel successful. When the market is up, we feel secure. When the team is performing, we feel capable. When we get the promotion, the recognition, the deal, we feel worthy. And when those things go the other way, we feel the opposite. Now, on the surface, that might sound almost rational. Of course, your emotional state responds to external events. That's just being human. But here is where it becomes a trap. What we've actually done over time, often without ever consciously choosing it, is we've outsourced our internal stability to the external world. We've handed the dial that controls our sense of worth, our sense of security, our entire sense of identity to circumstances that we do not control. Think about what that actually means. The market moves without warning, boards change, strategies fail, industries get disrupted, teams underperform, economic cycles turn, stakeholders become unhappy. If your internal equilibrium is anchored to any one of those things, you are, by definition, one external event away from destabilization. And this is precisely why so many high-performing leaders feel broken right now. It's not because the world has become more demanding, although it has. It's because the foundation they're standing on was always precarious. The outside-in model was never built for sustained pressure. It was built for a world that was more stable, more predictable, more controllable. That world no longer exists. And the cost of this goes further than most people realize. Because it's not just that outside-in leaders feel worse, it's that they perform worse in precisely the moments that matter most. When the pressure is highest, when the decision is most consequential, even when the relationship is most strained, that is exactly when an outside-in leader has the least access to their own judgment, because their cognitive and emotional bandwidth is already consumed. They're managing their internal state at the same time as they're trying to lead, running two parallel processes, fighting on two fronts simultaneously. And no one around them can see it, because what shows up on the outside is competence, composure, control, the performance of fine. But underneath that performance, there's an inner workload that is quietly accumulating, and at some point, not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily, it reaches a threshold. That's the moment leaders describe as breaking. That's the moment the outside-in model runs out of road. A while back, I wrote a book called The Broken CEO, and that phrase, broken CEO, is one I've seen create an instant moment of recognition in a lot of very senior people, because there is something profoundly disorientating about reaching the top of an organization and still feeling fundamentally not okay. It doesn't fit the narrative. It contradicts the story you've been telling yourself and that the people around you have been telling about you. And so what tends to happen is this. The leader who is struggling quietly concludes that they are broken, and that something is wrong with them, that they should be able to handle this, that everyone else at their level is somehow coping better. None of that is true, but it feels true, and in leadership, how things feel matters enormously. because it directly shapes how you decide, how you relate, and how you lead. So here is the frame I want to offer you. You are not broken, not even close. What you are experiencing is the logical, predictable consequence of a model that was never designed to sustain you. The outside-in model is inherently destabilizing, not because you're fragile, but because no one is built to anchor their internal state to things they cannot control. That's not a character flaw, it's not a weakness, it's not burnout in the traditional sense of working too hard. It's a structural problem, and structural problems have structural solutions. The fact that you feel broken is important information, not a verdict on who you are, but feedback on how you've been leading yourself. There is a profound difference between these two things. The Broken CEO was written for the leader who has reached the outer limits of what the outside-in model can deliver and has started to sense, often quite acutely, that there must be another way. There is. Before I describe that other way, I want to name something that I think is important. One of the most disorienting features of the outside-in trap is that it's almost invisible from the outside. When you're in it, it doesn't feel like a structural problem. It feels like a personal one. It feels like you should be stronger, more resilient, better equipped. It feels like everyone else is somehow managing what you're finding impossible. And so the leader in the trap often responds by doing more of what created the trap in the first place, working harder, achieving more, seeking the next external marker of success that will finally make the internal discomfort go away. It doesn't. Because you can't solve a structural problem with more effort. You can only solve it by changing the structure. That's what the inside-out shift actually is. Not a mindset trick, not a reframe for its own sake, but a fundamental change in where you locate your foundation. The alternative is what I call inside-out leadership. And before I explain what it is, let me be clear about what it isn't. It isn't about becoming indifferent to external outcomes. It isn't about detaching from your work, your organization, or your results. It isn't some philosophical retreat from responsibility. It is, in fact, the opposite. Inside-out leadership is about building your psychological foundation on something stable and internal, so that you can engage with external pressure more effectively, not less. Consider this. 2 leaders, same environment, same board, same market conditions, same level of organizational complexity. One derives their sense of identity and security from external validation. The other derives it from internal clarity, from their values, their self-awareness, their capacity to regulate their own emotional state. Which one makes better decisions under pressure? Which one maintains relationships when the stress is highest? Which one has the bandwidth, the cognitive and emotional bandwidth, to actually lead rather than simply react? The answer is obvious. And this is not a soft skill. This is not a nice to have. In the current environment, the capacity to lead from the inside out is fast becoming the most critical leadership capability there is. Because the world outside is not going to become more stable. It's going to become less stable. And the leaders who survive and thrive in that environment will be the ones who have built their foundation on something that external events cannot erode. Now, before I go further, I want to pause and acknowledge something. Understanding this conceptually is not the same as knowing where you personally stand. You might be listening to this and thinking, I recognize the outside-in trap intellectually, but I don't know how deeply embedded this pattern is in me. I don't know what my specific pressure points are. I don't know where to start. That's exactly why I created the Inner Leadership Profile Scorecard. It's a diagnostic tool designed specifically for senior executives and entrepreneurs, one that gives you a clear, honest picture of where you are on the inside-out spectrum right now, across the dimensions that actually matter: your relationship with external validation, your sense of identity, your capacity for emotional regulation, your clarity of values. It's not a test you pass or fail, it's a mirror. And what I consistently hear from the leaders who complete it is that the scorecard is the moment it stopped being abstract. It's the moment they could see their own pattern specifically and begin doing something about it. There's a link in the description where you can access it. I'd encourage you to take it before anything else. Let me close with this. The leaders who do this work, who genuinely shift from the outside-in model to the inside-out model, do not become passive. They don't become detached. They don't stop caring about results. What they stop doing is being at the mercy of them. They develop what I can only describe as a kind of internal sovereignty, a capacity to be fully present in even the most difficult external circumstances without losing themselves in them. To be genuinely responsive rather than reflexively reactive. And that changes everything. The quality of their decisions, the depth of their relationships, the way they handle conflict and uncertainty, the way they show up for their teams, not just professionally, but humanly. There's also something that happens to the people around them. Because when a leader stops operating from a place of internal scarcity, when they're no longer quietly protecting their own sense of worth through every interaction, the people they lead feel it. Teams become more honest, conversations become more direct, decisions become more collaborative. The psychological safety that organizations spend enormous amounts of time and money trying to engineer artificially, it begins to emerge naturally as a byproduct of the leader's own internal stability. Inside-out leadership is not just better for the leader, it is measurably better for everyone around them. And, perhaps most significantly, it ends the exhaustion. Not because the work gets easier, but because they stop fighting themselves at the same time as they're fighting everything else. The outside-in trap is not a life sentence, it is a pattern, and patterns can be understood and they can be changed. If something in what I've said today resonated with you, if you recognize yourself in the outside-in model, don't leave that as a purely intellectual recognition. Take the Inner Leadership Profile scorecard, use it honestly, sit with it, let it show you something true about where you are right now. Because you are not broken, you may be in a trap, and the very first step out of any trap is simply to see it clearly.